welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I am super excited to have you on the show for a lot of reasons, but one of them is we share a bit of geographical history. I was born in the 60s in New York, and I spent the second half of my life living in Atlanta, Georgia. And I think you had a similar path. Did I get that right?
You did. In fact, it was a little more severe than that because I didn't even, not that Atlanta back in the late 60s and 70s was the, city it is today. It was not. But I moved from Manhattan, where I lived with, my family lived until I was about 9, to a little island off the southeast coast of Georgia where Atlanteans go to vacation called St. Simon's Island, Sea Island. So that's where I grew up.
But where do you live now?
I live in California now. Yeah.
Oh, you're on the West Coast now. Okay. All right. Well, we actually shared that same path because before I moved to Florence, I moved from Atlanta to Hermosa Beach in LA.
Oh, right.
So literally
Florence.
Yeah.
I actually moved. I have lived so many different places, and I moved to Los Angeles from Chicago, where I had lived for 17 years. And that was the longest I've ever lived anywhere.
Amazing.
Even my childhood home. So.
All right. So speaking of New York, you grew up in New York and you always knew that you wanted to be a therapist. But how did you find yourself interested in becoming a sex therapist? Because that sounds like a different kind of therapist.
Yeah, it's a different kind of therapist. I was first and foremost a relationship therapist and a couples therapist. And what happened during my training was, and that's what I always wanted to be. I didn't always want to be a sex therapist.
Right.
Although I wouldn't have been surprised if I did. But it took me a while and, into my adulthood to realize what an unusual upbringing I had, because I was always really comfortable with the topic. And so when I was in graduate school learning to be a couples relationship therapist, and I was doing my training and getting supervised, you bring your cases to your supervisor. This is what the couple presented. What should I do? That kind of thing. And they kept presenting me with these sexual issues, among other issues. And my supervisors and trainers, when I would bring this to them, would look at me like I was some sort of perv. Like, why are these couples bringing this up to you? And
why are you so into this? What's going on with you?
And I was like, I'm not into it. They're just bringing it up. But what I realized is that they, we sense when someone's open to that and when they're not. And what I didn't understand at that point was how the bulk of couples therapists don't address sexual issues, which is insane to me. And so I accidentally got a subspecialty and then got known for sex therapy because I was like, what the hell? Not only do you think I'm weird for bringing this up when it's such a central issue to a couple's life and they're mentioning it to me, but you don't know how to help me help them. So I decided to go and get my own training and figured it out.
All right, let's talk about training a little bit. After you got your master's at NYU, you did a fellowship training in sexual therapy. So I have visions, maybe they're male visions. I don't know. I have visions probably are of what I would think I would like the training to be. What was the actual training like?
Well, it's interesting because I actually did 2 masters and a PhD, and I got this fellowship training at the same time I was doing my PhD. So I had actually gotten at that point a master's in human sexuality, which in many ways was more of a sex therapy training than even the sex therapy fellowship. The fellowship was in the Department of Psychiatry at NYU, and I was the first ever it was for psychiatry residents, MD students, focusing on psychiatry. And I had to convince them to admit me because I was not an MD. I was a PhD candidate. And they thought, and it turned out, and then they did it in the old Masters and Johnson model where you have a male-female team. So they had a hard time finding a male psychiatry resident who would be willing to partner with this lowly non-MD PhD candidate. But of course, I ended up schooling them all because I had already done this master's and had a lot of the training. But the way that I really got trained, and I think what will be most interesting to you, is by for all intents and purposes, desensitization. So every week, my professor would send us out on these field trips. So you have to go to 42nd Street when 42nd Street was still 42nd Street, not what it is today.
Yeah.
And where there were all these strip clubs and porn clubs, and you have to go into a peep show and get the woman there to tell you her story, or you have to go to a lesbian bar and pass, or you have to go to this S&M support group. Or and so we had these assignments, sometimes alone, sometimes in groups. And it was all just exposing us to, I got exposed to absolute S&M clubs, dungeons, voyeuristic clubs. The craziest things I got exposed to.
You must be a hell of a lot of fun at a cocktail party when people ask you what it is that you do for a living. There's probably two people. One, the last guy I interviewed was an FBI hostage negotiator. And, people like flock to him at parties for stories. But I got to believe you're coming in seconds because you're like really, really interesting stuff. Okay. So we've talked about a sex therapist, but what does a sex therapist actually do?
Yeah. Well, I think when you talk about the male fantasy of what I actually do, I think a lot of people confuse sex therapy with sex surrogacy. Right. So a lot of times when people hear I'm a sex therapist and they don't understand what that is, or where they hear of a sex therapist, they think that person, is coaching people in the bedroom.
That's what I thought.
Oh, yeah. Or having sex to demonstrate with them. Right. And not only is that illegal in most states, but that is not at all what I do. It's all, in the office, or now in today's world, remotely via Skype or whatever. But I, am first and foremost, it's a larger relationship issue. Sex is just one part. Even when there's an issue sexually, it's not just a sexual issue, right? It's a trust issue, or a body image issue, or a emotional intimacy issue, in addition to a sexual issue. So I'm actually coaching and interweaving couples therapy with guidance and healing around the sexual issues that the couple has. And then they have homework assignments and they come back the next week and report in. And we sort of often are rebuilding their sex life from the ground up, or reorienting it, or healing it, or whatever needs to be done.
Did you see Gwyneth Paltrow's Goop sex thing that she did?
Someone else was mentioning that to me. I have not seen it yet. No.
Okay. Well, there was one, I'm not going to do a good job explaining it. I wanted to ask you about it, but I'll describe it. And if it rings a bell, you can tell me what this was. But basically there was a couple, and they were doing some tantric type stuff, where he was like moving his hand over her body, and she was like flowing in rhythm with it. And it pretty much looked like, with their clothes on it, that we were all watching her have an orgasm. So is that a possible thing? And what is that?
It is a possible thing. It's not the kind of work I teach people how to do that through talking and describing. I don't do it in vivo, right? And, I don't actually say, okay, now lie down and put your hand, I don't do what you probably saw.
Yeah.
But what they're talking about is tantric. I actually cover that a lot. I have a chapter in my latest book, Quantum Love, which is, the chapter is called Quantum Sex. And it's all about how, because, for most of us, especially in the Western world, sexual stimulation and arousal is focused and centered in the genitals, right? That's where we feel it, which is great and wonderful. But what Tantra and Taoist techniques and more Eastern ancient techniques, but also techniques in terms of what we're learning now about how energy moves, you can actually move and pull that sensation up. So you're actually spreading it, that's how you have 7 chakra orgasms or full body orgasms. So it's about, Tantra is really a kind of spiritual element, an energetic element that you add to sex, or that you encompass around your sex life, or you insert into your sex life, depending on how you want to work with it. And so what this couple you probably saw doing is he was moving energy and she was moving her body And she must have been someone who was in relatively good practice, because this isn't something that most couples would be able to do the first time, have an orgasm.
Oh no, she was teaching it. It was
Yeah.
her and her husband demonstrating it.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to talk about porn, if that's okay with you. What are your thoughts on the access that everybody has now, digitally, to it for free all the time? Is that helping couples? Is it hurting couples? Is it a bad thing that, the 16-year-old boy doesn't have to go to the Playboy, the store to buy Playboy and sneak it, and now he's got it in his back pocket? Is that affecting how that child views it? So I know that there's multiple questions there, but I just love your overall thoughts on it.
Well, I am not anti-porn as a general rule. I think there is a role for it in an otherwise healthy sexual situation, alone or with a partner. Where it becomes a problem is where it becomes, it starts to sort of, two things. One, it can become, and many men, this is what we see with quote unquote porn addiction, is that it becomes this sort of compulsive way to deal with stress, anxiety, whatever your issues are, especially during the pandemic when people were so stressed out. They started to, a lot of men especially, started turning to that. And it's just this, it can start to take over their lives. And I've seen that happen in many cases. What I think is most compelling to me, and something that I've talked to my 3 sons about incessantly, because there's all of this new research. This is the first generation of young men who who have had this kind of constant access. And what we are now learning through the research is that, their brains are still developing. And until we're 27, our brains are still developing. And so when they're not only just watching porn, but watching it, think about a 14 or a 15-year-old boy, like how much they masturbate, right? Or fantasize. Yeah. I mean, they're watching porn that much or more on their little handhelds. When my 25-year-old was a teenager, I could control the computer access. Now they have smartphones. Their friends have smartphones. They have computers. They have pads. They have everything, right? So it's no longer about controlling access to porn. It's about educating them, because what we now know, and this is what's finally helped my boys understand, is that if you are watching porn, what they're now realizing is that when we watch porn, the part of our brain that processes 2D objects is the part that is engaged. So what you are accidentally teaching your brain especially when your brain is still developing, but even if you're just compulsively watching it, is to sexually respond to a 2D object, not to a 3D person. And so what they're starting to find is a slew of young men who are perfectly physically healthy having erectile dysfunction or difficulty getting aroused with a 3D woman, not only because maybe they have a skewed sense of what women and men should look like and what women want sexually. You touch her shoulder and she's, or you ejaculate on her face and she screams with an orgasm, like that's right. So it's a skewed sense of sex education. It's a horrible sex education of what arouses a woman. But more importantly, it changes the neural pathways in the brain so that you actually have trouble getting aroused by a real woman. And as soon as I remember my kids, because I have a line of sex toys, and my boys, 2 of them were with some friends, and they said, "Hey, Mom, can we have a sex toy?" And I said, "Yeah, I'll give you one, but only if you'll use it with fantasy, not porn." And they looked at me like I was talking Greek, fantasy? What do you mean fantasy? Like they didn't even know what fantasy was, because they never had to use it. They just have these porn images fed to them since the time they were first curious. And so I had to explain to them what fantasy was. Oh, you see a girl that you think is hot. In this case, they were all heterosexual. You see a girl that you think is hot, or you even saw something on porn a few weeks ago that was really hot. You imagine it, right? Because when you imagine it, you're engaging a different part of your brain than when it's just being fed to you.
Okay, let's That's a perfect segue into my next question area, and that's fantasy. So obviously, there are significantly different fantasies for men versus women. What is the typical male fantasy, and what is the typical women's fantasy? And then I'll ask my question around it.
Well, it's interesting because it's really changing with porn,
Yeah.
basically, and what's trending in porn. So now there's a lot more choking fantasies and things like that, which were never the case before. The most popular male fantasy was always, and I think fundamentally still is, a threesome.
Okay.
And women, fantasize, and this is what they found with porn as well, that women get aroused contextually. So female centric porn, the little bit that there is, actually has a plot, where there's a buildup and a seduction and a story,
There's no, what about the pizza delivery? That doesn't count?
Right. When he just shows up at the door and they start doing it. Right.
Yeah,
Like,
right.
yeah.
That is the plot. That's how much more of a plot do you need? Okay, got it. Now, so you've got these two completely different, fantasies. One has a plot, the other one, you don't need a plot. Is it a good idea because there's the fantasy that's in the bedroom.
Mhm.
You're talking, you're in the mood, you had a couple of glasses of wine, and you're telling crazy stories, right? And in that moment, the world seems perfect.
Mhm.
But then some people step outside of that, and some people say, why don't we actually do it? Why
Yeah.
don't we go get another partner? There's there's an app for that, right? Like, let's go do it. What's your stance on that?
It depends. I think there is an extremely small piece of the pie of people who are secure enough and communicative enough and not prone to jealousy or insecurities, who can handle bringing a third person into the relationship. And quite frankly, the under 35ers are actually better at this in many ways than the older, because they've really shed a lot of the boxes that we put ourselves into and the titles, and they're much more exploratory. But the tricky part is that couples bring this in and think, okay, let's actually do it for real. But then afterwards, it's like, are you still thinking about that person? Or maybe you really are still thinking about this person, and all these insecurities. It's such a slippery slope. And so, in my opinion, unless the two of you are so excellent at communication and handling your own insecurities and really attuning, no jealousy, like I couldn't do it. And I think I'm a pretty evolved person, but I also am pretty possessive of my man. Like, I don't want him to be with anyone else, even if I enjoy fantasizing about that. So I don't think it's easy for the majority of people to pull off.
Living here in Italy, it's become very obvious to me that I grew up with some very strong Puritanical American stuff.
Yeah.
And when I go to the beaches here and the girls are taking their tops off with, I can't tell you how weird it is. Like, if I went with you to the beach as a friend,
Mhm.
and you just took your top off in front of me, I'm turning purple. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know how to handle it. And my
Uh-huh.
other friend, and I'll be there with my friend whose wife, he's the husband. And I'm like doing this because I can't look at it. So the question I have for you is, what are your thoughts on sort of the puritanical, like when I walk down the streets here, the cover of magazines, like even like the equivalent of Cosmo, there's topless women, right?
Yeah.
The beaches, they're topless. Sexuality is just
Boobs are like shoulders.
boobs or shoulders. The discussion here about sex is so, like, the way that we are having a conversation right now, maybe not to this level, but they're perfectly fine with it. We could never have this conversation where I'm from in North America. What's your thoughts on that overall?
Well, it's interesting because you're absolutely right. We are so puritanical. I mean, when I was first starting my career 25 years ago, and even as recently as 5 years ago, because I do a lot of television, I was told I could not say the word orgasm on air, even though I was talking, literally the segment was about arousal or orgasm disorder or something. And I'm like, what am I supposed to call it?
What did you call it?
They said I was supposed to call it that special place.
Oh my
So
God.
I was on air and I was like, well, when a woman can't, as you were requiring, I call it, get to that special place. It was ridiculous. And it still is. And we are very puritanical, and people are worried about advertisers and, opinions, and we're raised that way. And yet I can't say orgasm on the nightly news, but you can watch on network television two people basically seeing everything but the tip of their penis and their nipples, right? Like we're very explicit when it comes to our media, but in terms of the images we portray, and sex is used to sell everything here. And yet we are extremely repressed. While in Europe, especially where you are, in countries, even like in Spain, where I lived for many years, which comes from a much more restrictive, repressive, especially on the heels of Franco and all of that, they tend to be open, but also very repressed, right? Where in Italy, they're open and not so repressed. It really depends
It's crazy.
on the country, but, and the history of that country. And our history is very puritanical. But I would say that in Europe in general, they talk the talk and walk the walk, while in the United States, they sort of talk the talk and they do not walk the walk.
It's so interesting. There was a woman the other day. She had to be late 80s, maybe early 90s. I live right in the center of Florence. So she's like walking down. She's got like a neckerchief on, and she's got high heels on the cobblestone. And she looked at me, and she just hit me with her eyes, this flirty look. And she had me like in the palm. She was like 90.
Oh, they know how to seduce.
Oh my God. Like, it's unbelievable. So I want to talk a little bit about marriage. A lot of the people who are listening to the show, they're married, they have kids. And if they were honest, and I'm approaching now 500 episodes, so I've heard all kinds of things from my listeners. And a common theme is that as they get a couple kids and time goes on, sex is a tenth of what it once was. What's going on there? Why is that the case?
Oh God, there's so many reasons. Exhaustion, distractions, hormones, stress, body image from changing bodies, resentments building up, conflict. There's so many different reasons in a long-term relationship why that happens. And especially once you have kids, I think the biggest culprit, honestly, especially in Western society and in our country, is that we have a skewed sense of what sex, in particular, what sexual initiation is supposed to look like. So we think it's always supposed to be like in the beginning of the relationship, when you didn't have kids and you didn't have responsibilities and you were going at it like rabbits and you couldn't get enough of each other. And we think we're going to spontaneously find the time for sex and fall into bed together when we have two screaming kids. Like, if you're waiting for sex to happen spontaneously when you have kids, you're waiting forever. Right? So you really have to be, and that's a lot of my work with people, is helping shift and create strategies for cultivating and continuing to cultivate your sexual relationship. And there are times in your relationship in the long haul, especially if you're going to have a long-term monogamous relationship, and we're not, we can put a pin in that. We can talk about that next, that we're not really designed for monogamy. So it does take commitment and effort. You have to keep redefining it. You have to make it a conscious priority. You have to schedule it in a way that can still be sexy and fun. What I find, the most common question I get asked by couples in long-term relationships, is how do we spice it up? Like, how do we, and what they're really looking for, I could give them, and I have plenty of books on this, a year's worth of tools and toys and positions and role plays and fantasies and all kinds of things to spice it up. And, they'll take that home, they'll do everything maybe once or twice, and then they'll come back and be like, okay, been there, done that, give me more. What we're really looking for when we say spice it up and keeping it interesting is consistency and intensity. That's what maintains a healthy, fun, vibrant sexual connection. So consistency comes from not only scheduling it and making it a priority, but committing to flirting, committing to seduction, committing to, not being complacent in your connection.
What do you mean by intensity?
Intensity comes with what we were talking about earlier, with the tantra, right? Intensity comes from making it deeper and wider, your emotional and physical sexual experience from each other. Because even a threesome or picking up a stranger in a bar or whatever, it gets old after 4 or 5 times. Like everything gets old except your commitment to being fully vulnerable and present physically, emotionally, and energetically in that exchange, and when you can cultivate that and learn techniques for doing that, it's a much less superficial and much more sustainable pleasure.
Okay. Inside of all of us, I would suspect that we have light and dark, right? We have the Madonna, what syndrome, right? It's this sort of like, we want to be a dad, a mom, a brother, a sister, the lighter side of things. But then, there's the fantasy side. There's the three-way, let's get freaky, let's try something that we never did. How do you manage the angel on one side and the devil on the other side of your shoulder?
By acknowledging them both. I mean, there was a saying in Spain, I remember, it's probably in Italy too, that you want most men in particular want a lady on the street and a whore between the sheets, right? Like that's and I think it's true for men as well, that you can have both. You can have this very loving and reverent and cherishing kind of connection, and with trust and willingness to be vulnerable, right? Meaning expose yourself. I don't mean necessarily cry in front of someone, although that's part of vulnerability, but I mean really opening yourself. Then you absolutely, I think that part of the intensity that we're looking for is that playful, raunchy, no holes barred kind of intimacy that you can create in a loving relationship where you feel totally safe and cherished and honored and respected. You can still get down and dirty when you have that opportunity.
All right. Speaking of down and dirty, as I was looking at your website, I see that you've got your own line of toys. Mm-hmm. Some of them are, pretty typical type toys that people would be familiar with, but there's some other ones that really got my attention. And
like what?
Like the panty one.
Oh yeah, that's a popular one.
Okay, so walk me through how one does the panty vibrator?
Oh, I love that one. It's such a good one so my favorite way to recommend, basically they're underwear that have a vibrating bullet in the crotch of the panties that you or ideally your partner can control. So they actually were in, I don't know if you ever saw that movie, The Ugly Truth with Katherine Heigl.
No.
The guy, gives her these vibrating panties that are mine, from my line. And she decides to wear them to a business dinner, but she loses the remote. And this little boy at the next table finds it.
Oh my God.
He keeps setting her off at the table. But the way that I design them, or what I had in mind and the way I recommend people use them, is like you wear them out to a boring cocktail party or to dinner or to whatever. And it's a very exciting and arousing secret, right? That your partner can zap you, basically, turn you on from across the room. It works, I think, 15 feet away. So you can be, talking to different groups of people and zap your partner's panties, turn them on from afar. So it's a fun, playful, arousing, exciting little form of foreplay.
Did you invent this?
Yeah.
So what's the exact name of it?
Those are called, I think they're all named after goddesses. I think those are called the Estrella panties. But I work with a company called Cal Exotics. I designed all the toys. Some of them, are variations on what has already existed, but I just tried to make a little bit better or quieter, or they're mostly designed, because at the time I started this line, there really weren't, a lot of toys that were really designed with women in mind, ironically, and so so women would say to me, I've tried sex toys, they don't work. But the reason was their partner went to the toy shop and said, if I were a woman, what would I want? Oh, I would want that giant, huge, realistic looking dildo that twirls around in circles. No.
Because the one I thought was the one with the double one. I thought that was the one
that was a good one. That is a good one too. Yeah. And that's great for two women. It's also, you can use it in a heterosexual situation too, if you like a little tush stimulation. But the one that women really loved, and this is a really fun one too, is I think it's called the Adonis, but it basically has has a suction cup on it. So you could put it on a wall or on the floor, and it stimulates the clitoris and the G-spot at the same time.
So if I'm your husband, I'm trying to figure out how I'm navigating this.
Yeah. Well, we're coming up on our 20-year anniversary.
You're doing something right.
Yeah,
you met him, if my research is correct, you met him prior to the Oprah show, and he came out to the Oprah show to meet you, and then made up a story about flew all the way back out to LA or something like that. Tell us the story of how you guys met.
Well, we actually knew each other as kids. When I was growing up in New York, we went to the same school. He was in the same class with my sister. Our parents were friends. And then we moved away when I was 9 and everybody lost touch. And then he saw me on something, I don't remember what it was, and reached out. And I sort of remembered him. And he said, if you're ever in Chicago, let me know. And so when I was there doing the Oprah show for the first time, he came to meet me. And he was just going through a divorce at the time. So I didn't want to touch him, even though I thought he was really cute and smart. And then he ended up reaching out to me again, almost a year later, saying, I'm going to be in LA for business. I was living in LA at the time. I'm going to be in LA for business. I would love to take you to the Madonna concert. So our first date was September 9th, 2001, before the Madonna concert. Second was September 10th for the Madonna concert. And then he was supposed to leave on the 11th. It was the September 11th. And he ended up spending a week in LA. And by the end, we were both in love. And that was it. 3 months later, we were engaged. But he says, he jokes about it now, but he says, the moment I realized I was really in love with you, and I barely remembered giving him this speech, but I guess I had learned to do it, is I said, look, you need to understand that, and I didn't mean it as an enticement. I meant it as a warning. Like, you need to understand that I'm 90% sex. I talk about it. I think about it. I teach about it. It comes up all the time. So like, you have to be totally comfortable with that to hang with me, which he is. The only thing he's not comfortable with me about is talk. And he told me this from the beginning. I'm not allowed to talk about the specifics of our sexual relationship. But it was weird for him because he would take me to like a work function, go and get me a drink and come back. And his female colleague would be telling me about her orgasmic disorder,
Yeah, right. Like, how do you
I'm in the twilight zone.
Right. I got that. Okay. You mentioned Oprah. I want to talk about Oprah for a little bit. How did you find yourself on the Oprah show? Did she find you? Did you find her? How'd that happen?
Yeah, no, you don't find, you can find her, but
yeah, right.
She finds you.
Okay.
She wants to.
Yeah.
And, I had been living in Chicago. I went on the show when my first book came out, and then it was 7 years. And during 3 of those years, I was living in Chicago and I was right there and I would pitch them regularly. You know, they don't even respond. But what was happening is I was actually doing a weekly radio thing with these local DJs. Every Friday I would go in just for fun and help and take calls and questions. And several of the producers of the Oprah show would hear that, because it was a drive radio show, would hear that. So when Oprah was finally ready to do a sexual show, a show on female sexuality, they already knew who I was and they reached out, and we ended up taping 2 back-to-back shows. And they called me on the way home and said, Oprah is launching a new television station. This is when she was launching OWN. And we want you to do a show on the channel. So I ended up doing, and then I launched a radio show on Oprah Radio at the same time. So I had a daily radio talk show for 2 hours live on Oprah Radio until they stopped doing original content, and then was her sex and relationship expert until she stopped doing the show, and also launched 2 shows on OWN.
How did that affect your life? Was there like a hockey stick moment? You know, I have a friend here in Florence who's been on the show a couple of times. And there was a real hockey stick moment where he started getting recognized in the street and things like that. What was it like for you when, I don't know, you started becoming famous?
I was always very positive and easy. I mean, it was a little weird. Like I could, because you can imagine what people are coming up and saying to me,
Right.
I was in an airplane bathroom and I come out and the stewardess, the flight attendant had basically blocked like they do for the captain. She had blocked with the cart, my exit, and said, listen, I just need to ask you a question. She wanted to know about menopause or something, so people that was the part that was interesting, is that people would literally come up to me and be like, listen, I have this problem.
Right.
But for the most part, it was lovely and positive, and I never had any negative experiences with people recognizing me or coming up and speaking to me. And they were usually pretty respectful if I was, with my family or with my kids. They would
Right.
just...
I would hope so. Let's talk a little bit. One more celebrity. Eva Longoria has decided that she's going to produce a show based on your life. How did that come about?
Boy, that has happened so many times. Eva was just one of them, and it'll eventually actually come to pass. But, in Hollywood, these things start and then stop and start and stop. I met her through this like random producer that I was friends with who had worked with her. And he said, you need to do something on your life, because, my life is insane. What, the things I see and the things that have happened, just my personal life, not to mention what I do for a living.
Yeah.
And so they were the ones that introduced me to Eva, who was lovely and really into it. It ended up falling through, not because of her, but because of some of the people that she works with who were not ideal. But and then I actually started to do it with Sherry Salata and Nate Berkus. So Sherry was the president of Harpo and OWN and the executive producer of the Oprah show, and Nate Berkus is the well-known designer who actually produced The Help. I had no idea that movie.
Nate
one of the producers. Yeah.
I didn't even know he was a producer.
Me either, until they started a production company after Sherry left Harpo and OWN to do her own thing after 25 years.
Right.
And they started a production company, and then they reached out to me, and then we were looking at doing it again. It's happened so many. Eventually I'll do it, but it just never really, it has to be the right circumstance.
Amazing. Okay. So as we wrap, I'm going to take a couple of minutes with you, and I want to go through some questions that might seem like, why is he asking me these? These are weird. But I want to get people to learn a little bit more about you. So first one is, what do people often get wrong about you?
That, like what you did, that I'm a sex surrogate and not a sex therapist.
I like my idea better, but that's fine. What is one thing that you have not gotten to in your life? And if you don't get to this, you're going to have some regret.
Hiking up to Machu Picchu.
what are some things that you're currently doing that you don't really love and you would like to do less of?
Absolutely nothing. I've gotten to that point in my life and I'm so freaking grateful.
Oh, you mean that? Oh, you mean that everything you're doing in your
I don't
life you
do
love to
anything
do?
anymore that I don't. I literally don't do anything, including for my kids, that I don't have a full body yes to.
A full body yes. I like that better than a fuck yes. A full
Yeah.
body yes. Ooh, that's good. I like that. Okay. What new behavior or habit has most improved your life?
You know, it's not that new, but I guess in the course of my life, it's new. It's meditation. That has definitely, and that's been over the past 7 or 8 years. But since I've been consistently doing that, that has drastically changed my life.
And what kind of meditation do you do?
All different, but I started with transcendental meditation, and now I go into that state many times a day. Like throughout the day, I'm constantly grounding and tapping in and tuning in um, calming my system down and getting back into my body.
Yeah, it's really good. I did TM in LA because 1,000 people said TM, so I did it, and my God, it's
It's
life. Yeah, it's life changing.
Yeah.
What is an unusual? We'll leave sex off the table here. What's an unusual or absurd thing that you love? Most people would think it's really weird or this is really unusual, but I love it outside of sex.
What is it? Gosh. I don't think I love, anything really weird. I do love, most people don't know that I love painting. And I also love, I don't know how I got started on this because I'm not I'm not a homemaker at all. I don't even cook, but I love embroidery. And I do have this thing about making embroidered vulvas.
Did you say embroidered vulvas?
Yeah, like vulva is like what most people call a vagina incorrectly. The vagina is the up inside the hole.
Oh, I
But the
know.
vulva,
No, I got it. I got it. I just, in my mind, I was having trouble embroidering
yeah,
a vulva.
like beautiful embroidered images that I put on. Like I just gave my girlfriend this denim shirt with this giant vulva on the back.
You win. You win the most absurd, craziest. You're the winner. I'm granting you the winner. If you could spend 1 month anywhere in the world, where would it be and why?
I would spend a month in Bali, where I've never been and I've been obsessed with since I was a little girl. So that would be on the bucket list too. And just like live in a little shack on the beach and meditate and paint and embroider my vulvas and play and explore all the temples.
Amazing. Are there any positions or opinions in the last few years, or it could be way back, where you've changed your mind substantially? You've shifted your position. You're like, I used to think this way about that, but I changed my mind. I don't think that way anymore.
I feel like I change my mind all the time. And as I, continue to grow and expand emotionally and spiritually, I think what is most changed for me is that I have strong beliefs, but I am not convinced I'm right ever. And so I think has set me apart and often is lonely in today's world, especially in American societies, that everything is so polarized and everyone is convinced they're right and the other side is wrong. And I'm sitting here looking around being like, can't you guys see that like both of you are right and both of you are wrong? And, it's sort of, I often feel like I'm in this meta perspective that no one else is sharing. It's kind of, so I would say that definitely has changed for me because I used to be in one of the camps, right? Where you are wrong and I am right. And now I can see all the misunderstandings more than who is right and wrong.
Meditation probably helps with that. With every new level comes a new devil. What are you currently struggling with?
I would say probably my motivation to produce, to create. I've been such a producer my whole adult life. And, over the past year, I've really taken some time off, and it's been so wonderful. And I love my life so much that it's hard to motivate in a way that it's never been hard to motivate before.
Different stage of your life. Really interesting. A couple more questions. If you can narrow it down to one thing that has had the greatest impact on your success, what would it be?
My traumas.
Your traumas.
Traumas. Yeah. My, every single time, I call them AFGEs, another freaking growth experience. Like those horrible things that have happened to me, really throughout my life, but certainly in my adult life as well. Every single one of them, whether it was breast cancer or my mother dying or my father dying, or, some of the emotional abuse that I suffered, and the sexual and physical abuse I witnessed as a child, all of that has been my greatest teacher, and also the source of inspiration to heal and learn and teach. It's all informed my work so hugely.
What do people never ask you, but you wish they did?
That I wish they did?
Yeah.
I don't know. People ask me whatever the hell they want, but I guess nobody holds anything back when asking me questions. And if they don't ask, I'll just volunteer it. I don't have much of a filter. Yeah, I wouldn't say there's anything I wish.
Anything. That's because you're super open. Two more questions. What is your guilty pleasure?
Chocolate for sure. And watching, I do when I need a pick me up, or I just need to zone out. I can't understand why. I love watching Hallmark movies.
Really?
Really cheesy Hallmark or like movie. Oh my God. And around the holidays, I like the princess for Christmas kind of stuff. Like, I don't know where that comes from. And
it's got to be a chick thing. My wife is exactly the same. All right. Last question. We're going to change it up. What one question would you like to ask me?
Oh, all right. Let's think. What's your sex life like?
That's such a broad question. How do I narrow that down? You mean like, well, here, huh?
How about this? What would you most like to change or improve upon or explore in your sex life?
I'll pick, those are all different questions. So I'll pick one of them. And I would say frequency. And here's the unfair thing that I did to my wife. When I was in LA, I wanted to have my testosterone checked. And testosterone, in your mid-20s is usually 900, let's say. Mine was around 420, and I'm 55 years old. So the doc said, if you get on hormone replacement therapy, in a couple of months, you'll start seeing the benefits of it. Sexually, your sex drive will increase, and all of the things that are associated with increased testosterone levels. I didn't notice anything for about 90 days, almost to the day. And then, holy shit.
Your desire went through the roof.
When I tell you my desire went through the roof, I was a creepy old man, like looking at everything that was walking by. And it was exactly like 16 years old, where you just want to stick it into any hole, like, what's the movie where he puts it in the apple pie? Like,
American Pie.
American Pie. Yeah, there you go. Like, literally, I was that guy. And went back, he looked at the numbers, and it was too high. It was 1,400. So they dialed me back, and I got down. And that was, about 2 years ago. My wife did not do that for her hormones. So we have radically different drives now as I'm aging. Because I feel so good on testosterone. I just think it wasn't like it was. I don't know. You have to ask her. I don't know.
I just gave myself my testosterone shot before I got on the air with you. I was due for it. I do it once a week.
Yeah.
And I'm in my 50s too. I think, especially if we could do a whole show on hormones and the medical causes of low desire and sexual issues, but women need testosterone too, for energy, for general sense of well-being, for muscle tone, for desire, for sexual response. So what you've done is you now have a healthy hormonal balance, and she doesn't.
Right. So we're gonna have to we're gonna
have to get to her.
We're gonna have to get. We'll make that a part 2.
Do a couple session. How about that? That'll be really fun.
It'll be so much fun. And speaking of, you have a new podcast. Can you tell me the name of the podcast? I want to make sure we get it right.
It's called The Language of Love with Dr. Laura Berman. It's all about how to love and be loved better. And I have all sorts of amazing interviews. It's from a mind, body, and spirit perspective. So I talk to all kinds of teachers and thought leaders, and all about how to love and be loved better.
Amazing. Do you have any final words, suggestions, or an ask for the people that are listening?
No, just keep growing and keep exploring your sexuality, your ability to love, to let in love, and definitely you can follow me on social media. I'm always putting up tips and ideas there. That's all at Dr. Laura Berman. Oh, and I have a free program on my website called 7 Days to Better Sex. So you get a video and sort of a write-up every day, and it helps you jumpstart your sex life.
Amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time with us.
It was fun. Good to be with you.